have all of our larvae. So that poster behind there is what they look like when they first hatch. Bit of a grainy image, but basically this is a timeline of how the Murray cod season happens. So we start with brood fish and they're in the ponds. They stay in the ponds the whole time. We put nest boxes in there and they lay all their eggs for us. So very convenient for us. We just put a box in there. When they feel like it, they put their eggs in there, and then that's what we're looking at when we're getting a good spawn. You can see there's a lot of eggs in the boxes. We then bring them in and incubate them. So the incubator room I'll show you is a bit further down the hatchery, but that's what it looks like in the incubators. And then 7 to 9 days later they'll hatch. So depending on the temperature, we have a heater chiller in our system here, so we can set the temperature on that. We don't want it too dissimilar to where they've come from the ponds, and we don't want it too dissimilar to when they're about to go into the ponds, as larvae sort of start growing out to fingerlings. But we can control the temperature in here so that their incubation time is consistent. And then we move them as larvae once they're hatched into these trays, and they'll stay here for like another 10 days. And this is where we then feed them up. So for a couple of days when they look like that big bubble on them is their yolk sac. They'll be absorbing all of their nutrition out of that, so they don't actually need food for a couple of days. And then once they start to come on eating, we feed them Artemia. So Artemia is like a little shrimp, very tiny. You can't really see them, but each dot of orange is one of them. So there's a lot of them in there. You'll see them sort of settle out if you take that air stone out. So they're alive. They come to us as dry cysts, and then we incubate them to then bring them to life, so they hatch out. So that takes 24 hours. I'll explain a bit more in the incubation room for them, but that's what we're feeding the larvae. And then once they've been fed up and they're eating well, we know that they're strong, we then shift them out to the ponds. So that's the next step on here. So in this photo, it's sometimes how we do it if they're in a bag, but often we'll use like a transporter or we'll use buckets, things like that, to then put them into ponds. And that's where they'll then stay for about 6 weeks. If the weather's really great, then you only need 6 weeks. If the weather starts to get a bit cooler, then we might need a bit longer, 8 to 10 weeks, and then we get them out again once they're a gram. And that photo there is Ryan in the harvest pit, so you'll see more outside of that, but once we've done with them in the ponds, we basically pull a pipe and send them down to the harvest pit, net them out of there, and then they're ready to be restocked into whatever river system that we've got on the agenda. They're ready to go, released into the wild. So the whole process isn't really that long. It's talking like 5-10 days at each step, and then a few weeks in the pond, and then they've gone from being eggs out into the wild already, and they're a few months later. So I'll show you the Artemia now. The Artemia up close is like this. They're very tiny, so you can't really see in there. This is what they actually look like. They're quite orange. And then once they've fed that orange stuff for a while, on themselves, get rid of the orange. Then you put them in the pond and then they start going more green, see-through, yellowy colour. So they actually get quite orange from eating these. So this is our incubation room for this. Basically feel free to come through and have a look at this first batch here. So this is what it looks like when we've first hatched them. So we put this batch on 24 hours ago, and then it takes 24 hours in salted water to then incubate them. So they're incubating at about 29 degrees. And you'll see it sort of, you can see the orangey bit a bit, but there's also some brown mixed in there. That's the shell of the Artemia. So they come as, basically looks like Milo in a tin of brown stuff. And then once they hatch, they're still in there with their shell. That magnet rod that we've got in there, that metal thing that you'll see when you go through, that's what we use to actually harvest the Artemia to get rid of the shells.
Is the Artemia native?
No, they're like a saltwater creature. Right, yeah. So quite different from what they're actually eating, but similar size to the plankton that they then eat in the ponds.
Yep.
And nutritionally similar as well. So the way that the magnets work, a bit magic, a bit witchcraft. The Artemia cysts are coated in a magnetic powder. So once we incubate them, we've got the Artemia, we've got the shells. The shell's really hard, it's a bit bigger than the Artemia. Fish might choke on it. It's got no nutritional value. We want to get rid of all that shell and just have Artemia. So what we do is we wave these magnets through and it grabs all of the shell, and then rinse that off, and then we're left with the orange stuff over there. So you can see that's a lot more orange than what we've got in here. It's still got that shell mixed through in there. So again, we've sort of got things set up as a simulation because we don't have eggs this time of year. But in these first two rows, you see the water flowing through, sort of shows you the setup that we have. So when we bring them in from the ponds, the eggs are quite fragile, quite sensitive to air. We don't want them to dry out, so we bring them in a bit of a crate filled with water. We get them out of their spawning boxes. We cut up the spawning boxes out at the ponds, so they've got fly screen in them. So quickly take the fly screen off, shove it in the water, get it to here as quick as we can, and then we chop it into smaller sheets and hang them in here. So these pegs, basically we'll chop them to a bit bigger than an A4 size sheet and then slot them into each of these, and then we can easily pull them out and have a look at them. And once they've hatched, we can remove the sheets easily and let the rest of them hatch. The way that these incubators are set up, we'll have one spawning in each, and then of that spawning they'll hatch down the bottom. These are anchored so that they'll go to this corner, and then there's a pipe there that will siphon them out of there through this and into the tub at the bottom. So you'll see along there for each incubator we've got a tub, and sometimes we've even got a spare tub if we have too many hatching at once. But essentially as soon as they're starting to hatch, we start to move them out to those trays. So we don't want them in here too long, but again we've got a couple of days up our sleeves because they're absorbing that yolk sac, so they don't need food straight away. It's just if we're starting to be crowded in these baskets, we'll move them out. And then sometimes we need to lower the water to get the last ones out, but that's why it works well with each spawning. Each spawning might hatch at different rates, depending on when they've laid their eggs. So if we're checking every second day, we might have two spawnings that we've collected on the same day and they might still hatch 3 days apart. So that's why we've got separate for each spawning. And then you'll see there's holes in the bottom of those trays as well. That's for any debris, including their eggshells. So that sort of stuff will get out. And then we're able to easily move just the larvae themselves without all the crud and stuff, get them into those trays and start getting them ready to feed, and then feed them in Arcadia. Yep. So pretty immediately. So in the pond we've got fairly equal a number of females and males in each brewfish pond. So the female, they pick when they're going to do them, but we just consistently check the boxes. The female will lay her eggs, and then the male will come and fertilise and then guard the eggs. So sometimes when we're checking the spawning boxes, the male will still be there, and we're sort of going to wiggle around and kick the water around a bit to scare them off. Sometimes they're a bit protective, and these are the fish up to this size, so fair enough, we're taking their eggs, but that's what goes on in the pond, and then we get the eggs and they're already ready to go straight away, and then we bring them in here, slot them in here and incubate them. So they're in here for, depends on whether, but could be about 10 days. And then they're ready to go into that next system. So it's a lot more intensive, you'll see when I compare it to the golden perch, but for the cod, the whole like eggs to larvae, that process is a lot longer. So this is our golden perch incubation room. We also use it as a spawning room. So the process of the goldens is that they'll be in the pond for most of the year, and then we'll bring them in, and then we'll actually hormonally induce them. So we use a hormone that's naturally occurring in their body, but if they're in dams, they won't naturally do it. In nature, they would normally have a migration before they spawn. They need a big change in the water conditions. So things like when we have flood, those sort of occurrences, you can see some studies done of how far golden perch will actually travel, and they can travel like 1,000 kilometres just to make that movement during summer for their spawning. So in dams that's not possible, can't really simulate that out there. So what we do is basically boost their hormone levels once they're kind of close to being ready. So they'll still develop eggs, they'll still get ready, but they just won't actually release their eggs and complete the process if they're not in the right conditions. So they're really wanted in warmer conditions than the cod. So the cod are first in the year, so the cod's starting like September, November, it depends on if we've had a really cool winter or if that springtime comes early and it's nice and warm for them. And the goldens we're more looking at like December, January. So that's the goldens we want to make until it's really nice warm temperatures outside, and that's when the females will be really full of eggs. We'll get them in and we'll be able to look at each of the fish and see how ready they are. If they're not quite ready, we can always hold them aside at a bit of a higher temperature, see if they come on. But they're developing those eggs for a while, and then they get to the point that their eggs are ready. So what we do is we look at their eggs under the microscope before we inject them, and if we decide that they're looking ready and good to go, then we will give them a bit of hormone, and then we will pair them up with a couple of males. The males are a lot easier to get to be running and ready, but again, they need those conditions outside to be how we want them to be before they'll be ready to go, and then we also boost them with a bit of hormone as well. So these two bigger tanks at the back, they're the sort of size that we'll use for 1 female, 2 males, and then we'll leave them in there for a few days, so we inject them, and then 2 days later we'll come and look for eggs. So they'll sort of do their own behaviours in there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but mostly if they're ready to go and their eggs are looking ready and you've got males that are running, then you give them the hormone dose and they just do their thing over that time. You leave them alone, leave them in the quiet, in the dark, and they'll have their courting behaviours and stuff. And then basically they'll release their eggs in the tank, the male will fertilise in the tank immediately, and they'll leave us the finished product. So then we come in, we remove the adult fish, and we're like, great, they're done, good. And then we'll hang on to them and feed them up again before putting them back in the pond, so they're good nutrition. So it sort of takes a lot out of them to spawn. Same with the cod at the end of the season, we'll feed them up well while they're still eating in summertime. And then we will scoop the eggs out and move them to these smaller tanks. So the eggs are quite fragile again, same with the marine cod eggs. You don't want to expose them to the air too much so they don't dry out. And you want to move them quickly and gently so that there's not a lot of weight crushing the underneath ones. Sometimes the eggshells will be quite fragile, like every fish is different, so there's sort of change it depending on how the fish is, but what we want to do is basically move the eggs in here. If we've got a lot of eggs, we'll split it up. So some spawnings this year we had 4 of these just for one spawning. So often we'll have more incubators. So for the cod we have like 1 incubator per spawning. For the golden perch they have a lot more eggs, but the survival's not as good. So in that case we have more incubators for each spawning. So we might have like 2 to 4 incubators per spawning tank. So we also have some spawning tanks out there that we've used, but yeah, we don't want to have only 1 tank per spawning, because then again you might have some fish in there that aren't so healthy, and then that corrupts the good ones in there, and then they can get fungus and spread across the whole tank. So they will then be in here for a few days, not too long. The whole process is sort of about a week from when we inject to when we're actually putting them in the pond. Again, we want to wait until conditions are good outside as well, so we don't want to have it really cold outside, put the new ones into the pond when they're only a few days old. But those eggs will only take a couple of days to hatch, and then at that point in here we will use light, so they're light sensitive once they're free swimming. So we have air rays in here as well, because as the eggs come in, they're neutrally buoyant, and they will kind of clump together and sink down if we don't keep them moving, so you just want gentle movement. And as they start to hatch, they start to learn to swim. After a few days of them swimming, they start to come to the light and react to that, which is really great. That's a good sign. We know that they're healthy and they're able to swim, they've developed correctly. We'll have another look at them under the microscope at that stage and see how their fins are, whether their mouth is moving and they're able to operate and function as a fish. And at that stage then we'll take them out to the ponds outside. So they get stocked a lot earlier than the cod, but take about the same amount of time in the pond before we harvest them, and we're also harvesting them around 1 gram, and that's when they then go into the river system. So as fingerlings they will come out the same at the end of the pond process, but it's quite different, the larvae eggs process for the goldens. So out here I'll explain a little bit more, and I'll show you we've got some brood fish in here. So sometimes we've got some of the goldens left at this time of year, because it wasn't that long ago that we used them. But then these ones will go back to the pond too as well. So we'll come out here and you'll see what the brood fish are like. So some of these fish in here, you're looking at like 5 years. Yeah, but it depends what waterway they're in. Sometimes we get some, yeah, so sometimes we'll get some from like a lake system or something. It's a closed system, and if it's like a really good system, some of those fish are really fat. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's like they're overweight and it's like too much fatty tissue in them. But yeah, basically the better nutrition they are, the better their egg quality is going to be. But yeah, those ones in the lakes won't necessarily spawn if we're looking at fish from there. So they might also put more nutrition into their own growth rather than into eggs that are then released. So that's sometimes a difference as well in weight of the fish in the line. So When we're out of season, what we do is have a catheter. They might sort of explain that up at the FRB a bit more, which is our fingerling receiver bay. It's also our quarantine area, so that's where we process the brood fish. But using a catheter, we can sort of insert that easily into the vent, and if that goes through easily, then it's female because there's more room there to go up into the ovaries. And if it's a male, then that will sort of only go in a certain amount. But if it's during the season, it's a lot easier. You can just visually look at them. So in these photos, these are both females. You can see the bulge either side full of eggs, and their vent is quite red and quite plump. So that will swell up a fair bit. The males will also get a dark vent when they're starting to be ready, but their bellies won't look anywhere near. There's a mix in those, so we've got a good mix of female and male because they were used this year. Some of them were used, some weren't, but these are sort of ones that are ready to go back to the pond after the season. So there might be more males in there because we're doing it like 2-to-1 ratio, females to males. That's just to sort of up our chances of fertilisation, and usually the females have a lot of eggs, so that's why we do 2 males. So after here, if you guys want to head up to the ponds, then that will give you a bit more context to what happens after they've done this stage. So then they go into the plankton ponds, and then the person up there should be able to explain to you as well what happens in the harvest pit.
Alright guys, how you going? These are our plankton ponds, guys. So after you see the fish from the hatchery, once they hit a certain size, they get stocked out into the ponds, and these ponds we'll fill with water, we'll fertilise it with chaff and even actually some fertiliser as well. You leave it for a few weeks, a month depending, wait for your plankton bloom to grow, and then once the plankton bloom grows, you can throw your fish in. So normally give or take about 50,000 fingerlings a pond, depending on the size of the pond. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but that's like a good sort of average. And then they're in there from anywhere from sort of 30 days to sort of 6 weeks, hopefully once they hit about 1 gram, and then they can go and get harvested, and that's when we stock them. All right, we'll take you to where we harvest the fish.
It's about 4 kilometres of pipe work underground here. So everything leads back to the 2 pipes coming out the wall there, where the blue tub, purple tub. So when we want to harvest, it's just like pulling the plug in your bar. We just pull the inner standpipe out and put a lower one in. So we pull it out 24 hours before we're ready to go. We'll put the lower one in, go home, come in the next morning. The pond should be down, because they're tapered down to the walkways, should be about here with about that much water in it ready to go the next morning. So we just pull that smaller inner out when we're ready to go in the morning, park the tub underneath the pipe there, and then bang, all the fish start coming down the drain and end up at our final point there. When we're finished our harvest, or when we think most fish have come through, we give it a quick flush of our bore water system. It's colder water, the fish don't like it, they seem to tend to like to swim upstream when the water's disappearing. And then yeah, once that cold water comes through, flushes it all out. We pick these tubs up with the telehandler, which, have you been into the FRB yet? You've come by there? Or, yep. You'll see that the telehandler is set up there with the blue tub on there, and that's how we divvy out the fish into the tubs. So from being in the pond, tiny, growing up all the way through here to there, ready to go out to the river or the lake, they have not been netted once. So their scales and their skin is perfect. The only thing they've had dramas with is if there's a bird or something like that, or a back swimmer or something like that has attacked them. Other than that, we have not netted them once, and they're ready to go out for you to catch. So yeah, you'll see, you can walk along the edge here and have a look over the top and have a look at how it all works.
How much are you harvest for releasing?
It depends. Normally we try and get 50 to 70,000 fish, or sorry, larvae in the pond.
Yeah.
And then we hope that at least 80% survive. That's what we hope for. That's the best outcome. It doesn't always happen. On a day like today, the cold weather, their metabolism slows down, plankton could die off. It's a lot to do with the temperature. Yes. And yeah, plankton supply. Yep.
Yeah, very difficult question. It all depends on structure and sort of food availability and space in the current water.
Oh, sorry. You're right. How do these get loaded up?
Yep, so we net them out.
Yeah,
and that's the only net. We have to net them out of here. Then we weigh the net and then put them in. So we weigh 300 to get an average weight. So I'll say, okay, this tank is the average size. And then they go to the transporter. Depending on where they go, that's going to be like another sort of pipe on the tub shot into the water. So
Yeah, I've seen them floating around before,
and then pull that valve up and then out they go.
So what are these fish here? The last of it, are they?
Yeah, there's a couple more ponds left, but that's that's the size we try to aim to get them to. So about gram. One's just off of the do right now.
Where are these ones destined for? You don't know?
Not sure yet. Yeah. Probably the basin, or it's a melt, maybe melt.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Okay, who's the culprit? Who's the fisher? Well done. That's all right. It's not, just leave it there for the second. Well done. Now, let me see where the hook is. Okay. Now, my hands are quite wet, so I'm going to handle this as gently as we can. I want you to look at something very quickly though. See where the hook is in its mouth? That's a little circle hook, and the circle hooks are designed to hook in the mouth of a fish. And we don't want a belly hook up, but if we do get one, we would have snipped that off. Okay? So we're not going to snip that off. I'm just going to take that out of its mouth. And if we have to, we can use pliers. We're going to get him back in the water pretty quick.
I'm a teacher as well, and like, some people go, oh no, I've got private. These are beautiful fish.
It's good to see they're catching a few fish then.
Oh, it's lovely.
Yeah.
It's really good. We've caught some lovely fish. You're right, Roger.
You've probably got the most dangerous job today, getting down that bank.
Oh yeah, I've been. We've got to put him back close to the water.
This is a lot of what Julian does, is stocking these fish. So in that tank there, there's about another 40 or so in there still to come in today. Yep. And they take those tanks all around Victoria and release them into the different areas that we use. And as I said earlier, this stocking of Murray cod in particular has been a huge thing that the Victorian Fisheries Authority have achieved in Victoria. It's been something super, super special, and it's going to continue on more so now that this hatchery here at Arcadia is going. It's going to be a really special part of our development. So Jules, I'm going to hand it over to you.
No worries. So these guys are Murray cod. Now these are the largest freshwater fish in Australia. Aren't they super cool? Now normally, when I'm transporting cod, I'm transporting teeny weeny little ones so I can get as many as I can in the water. So it's really cool for me today to be able to work with some fish that are a little bit bigger, which are ready for you guys to catch. So what we want to do is, when we're handling cod, we want to keep our hands nice and wet, and then one of the best ways to do it is to keep them in the water. So with these guys, we want to try and get them in the water as quick as we can. So if you guys want to have a look, I'll pull one up so you guys can have a nice little look at him, and then I'm going to chuck him in the water if that's all right. How cool's that? Look at that pattern. What do you reckon that's good for? Yeah, definitely.
Julian was saying before that these fish within a year could be up to a size where we'd be allowed to keep them. So they could be over 55 centimetres in a year. Now this is what they're bred for, and this is their space. And watch them coming out. Now remembering these fish have been travelling quite a long way from here, then they're in the back of that tank and they're getting, as Julian said, they're getting a bit antsy with each other and they're